We have trains, we have buses, we've got the subway, and now it's time to add trams. So we're going to see a substantial tram station which will be situated right in the middle of our ever expanding transit hub. Much like the other methods of transit within this big transport park plaza development, I'm looking to get the main building blocks in place, and then as we build up the city, we can connect the various routes. I'll look to expand the walkability of the area here again today, and also expand the theme of the park areas between the individual transit interchanges. So I'll be keeping the style of the recreational areas just the same with the development, and I'll be hoping that will bind everything together and look like it's going to be one big pre-planned development. Now I'm going to take back a lot of the buildings that I put in place temporarily last week, so we've got a nice open area to work with. I need to quickly adjust the positioning of some of the surrounding roads. Essentially, what we're looking to do here is provide turnaround opportunities for the trams rather than a standalone loop. I'm going to let them turn around by going all the way around the central station or any of the other nearby buildings. But to enable them to do that, I'll need to just adjust the alignment and the width of some of the existing roads beside our subway plaza. We got a ton of walking going on here, and that's really just all the Sims leaving the city after I bulldoze those temporary buildings. That said, it does give us a bit of a peek into the future and gives an idea of how the place is going to look like once we've actually built a downtown around it. It's important to check the networks that you're planning to have the trams running on. You might notice that you're potentially missing a track on one side of the roads, or maybe you've got a bad connection on one of the corners, so sometimes you can fix these as well just by nudging it along or move it. After ensuring the ground's flat and removing any vegetation, it's time to start getting the layout for the tram interchange in place. I wanted to create a central walkway so the Sims can easily jump between one tram to the next, and then I decided a number of parallel lines and then leave a big gap in the middle, for a kind of signature park was going to be the call here. I just needed to make sure that we have enough space with the tram stops on each section of these roads. Now I wanted to make sure that these things are in parallel, so we just use the same angle on each section of the road. We just use the angle from the tooltip. I can fine adjust the positioning of these roads just using the vanilla road tool. We'll get it all boxed off, and I want similar sizes at the edges, to detail later as well. This layout will of course give us pretty high capacity for now. I'm going to hook up 6 lines initially. All lines will enter the tram interchange from the central station side, and this should ensure that we have a good flow of traffic. And by using pedestrian roads, of course vehicle traffic is not going to be an issue. That's really going to help keep things moving as it gets really busy later on. An additional benefit of using these wide pedestrian roads with two-way trams is that we're hard baking in some extra capacity in the network, and we can add additional routes at any point in the city if we want with minimal effort. Might mess with the flow of the trams a bit, but that's something that we can figure out if it becomes an issue later down the line. 6 lines is quite a lot though, even as a starting point for a city. To give a few more options for trams entering the interchange, I'm going to extend the roads of the 6 a little bit further on, and we'll connect them down near the train tracks. It'll look a bit nicer, and it will give us a little bit of some detailing opportunity later on. It's always important when we are building these hubs that we make sure that everything works before we start building around it. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up 6 basic routes around the immediate vicinity. This will show us any pathfinding issues that we need to address, is anything broken, and also let us know just exactly how many subway depots we're going to need as well. So if we don't have enough trams coming from the depots, it will give us a warning and we can plan around that. Stopping to take a look at everything running, I don't really see any major issues at this point. However, the game is telling us that we don't have enough trams, so it was indeed time to add an additional depot. That said, all routes seem to be running as planned. In terms of any future issues, the bus station potentially might cause some congestion if we add a lot of routes running from there. A lack of car traffic will definitely help, of course, but we do only have 2 routes running at the moment, so it's definitely something I'll be keeping an eye on as the build progresses. For the park area, I really wanted to use some of the new paving surfaces from Static Noise to get a feel for how that actually looks in the game. Rather than the thumbnail, I just drew a few sections out, to show me the full palette. These things look great. There's a ton of variety, as you can see, and you'll see me chop and change these surfaces a few times until I land on the one that I want. And even then, I'll probably change it up a little bit as the build progresses. When I was adding some of the surfaces in the area, I did find some inconsistencies on the draw order, and the draw order dictates whether the surface should show underneath or above in any given scenario, the road rather. So I found that sometimes it would draw under and sometimes it would draw over the road. Really strange, hadn't come across that before, but it's not a big deal. We can always just turn snapping off and manually do the positioning of the surfaces if necessary. From the tram stops, I'm just gonna use the good old pergola. I was having a look at the International Airport asset. There's actually a really great transit shelter on that asset. I guess it's built into the mesh of the airport, so not an option to use it on this build, sadly. That said, we can chuck some seats on the pergolas, stick in a few billboards at the back, and it looks pretty good. And got another idea to customise these little stops a little bit later on, so keep an eye out for that. For the tram park, I landed on the orange or red brick, and I'm going to use the surface to create a border, and I really want this development to have a real splash of colour. So this park or plaza will be the centrepiece of the development, and I'll be able to add some buildings here at the main entrance, and hopefully we get plenty of walking action going through it. I've taken Corona Plaza in Queens as a bit of inspiration for the general layout on this one. It won't exactly be the same, but I like the layout of the pavement, so I'm going to run with it. I'm going to add some grass and some trees. It will be quite different, but I do want to create a little bit of green shaded areas here, so I'm not going to be adding any food vendors or any of that kind of stuff. As a little centrepiece, I went and created a custom fountain. Pretty straightforward. It's 4 wall fountains in a square, and then I'm just going to use the big fountain, the large one, sink it into the ground, and I'm just going to have the statue poking above the little ones. And that looks nice as a little unique centrepiece for that park. To make it walkable, I just added lots of invisible paths on the brick area. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to have a small strip of commercial here, and we'll plug it in and see what we get. I've got some detailing to do on this small commercial strip, so I'm going to crack on and get that done now. I'd like a little access alley, towards the rear of the strip. And I'd like some uniform walls surrounding this little development as well. At the back, I'm going to give some secure gated access. We'll use the metal fences between the walls to give the impression we've got little gates. So that one in Frosty Gaming's YouTube, so all credit to him. Oh, that's a great idea. Once all the surfaces are extended to fill the gap, I'm going to provide some additional seating, some heat lamps, flower pots, and we'll give a nice appropriate few little props, to the development. And hopefully people will stop there and have a bite to eat while they're waiting to pick people up or whatnot. And a few trees at the back that can hide a view of the alley, and just mask a little bit of the tidiness of that service area. The next big feature that I want to add is an extension on the existing park areas. So that's between the big plazas at the subway and the development we're working on today. So it's a bit of a tight squeeze, but with Anarchy on, I was able to squeeze the park in without too big of an overlap, and I'll have been able to continue that pattern, and I'll have been able to do it quickly as well. So we're able to link all these transit developments together with a nice cohesive park pattern. It'll take a bit of an adjustment with the surfaces, and I'll probably need to draw some fences back in, but it will be pretty straightforward stuff and easy to do. I'm going to try and use the same fences and box off all the individual little areas that are currently open. And these fences always help boxing off these little areas, and it does help provide contrast, against those surfaces. In the small section beside the new path area, I'm going to manually recreate a mini version of that park. We're going to have a similar waved path, same trees, same props. I'm going to repeat the covered walkway over there as well. Now I had to re-plop down the initial park as I noticed that the props actually had a different colour. I just want the same variation and we'll get the colours all matching up. Over beside the central station we have a reasonably big sized plot of land. Here I'm planning on putting in a transport workers car park. Again, I'm going to revisit some of those new surfaces and decide on what I want to use here. So to get a nice curve section in the entrance, I'm just going to use a net lane as a guideline. I've been using paths up to this point to get these smooth curves in, you know, with surfaces. I saw Sully using net lanes in his last videos, and for little delicate areas like this, it's going to work quite well, so I'll be doing the same. Once I added some hedging and appropriate signage for this workers car park, it became quite apparent that the surface was actually quite a lot darker than what I would like to see in this area. So if you find yourself in the same position where you like a surface but perhaps it's maybe just a little bit too dark or a little bit too light, you can adjust it yourself using some of Ogendo's solid colour surfaces. And all you do is you just simply overlap them to adjust the lightness or darkness as you find fit. I'm really happy with the look of this one now. I think it's a much better fit to its surrounding areas. I'm not going to do any further detailing other than the surfaces really on this one. And this type of massive transit hub I reckon should have a newish feel to it. So no further adjustments really necessary. Back to the main build area, and I'm going to add some manicured grass surfaces to some of these little gaps between the roads. Remember, the surface orientation will run in the direction you draw your first surface line on, so doing that means that we can get horizontal lines in exactly the same direction on every individual surface that we're drawing. I'll complete the look on some of these areas by adding fences, lights, a few additional props like benches and trash bins. I do want to box off the areas where we have some hidden drops in elevation. At these points you can't just draw net lanes as it will run with the elevation of the ground, you know, it will just sink in. So instead here I'm going to draw out a normal fence or wall. I'll recolor it using recolor tool, lock the elevations, then I'm going to shift it and place it with move it. There has been an update to Anarchy since I have made this build. So with Anarchy now you can actually force the network to ground, which means that things are an awful lot easier to work with. So the step that you've just seen will be necessary in the future, which is great. One defining feature of the entire build will be colour coding of the tram network and the tram stops. So I'm going to use the same solid colour surface collection, and I'm going to draw a strip of solid colour on the side of the road where the trams are going to stop. And if I decide to add more lines to the network, there's going to be a nice and straightforward process to repeat on the other side of the road. It can take a bit of trial and error to get the colour that you want, and there are quite a few options on the surface pack, so feel free to experiment and have a play about with the colours if you're doing anything like it yourself. When you do have a look in the colours in the pack, you'll notice that the same colours are on there twice. One will have a little icon on it and one will not. The little icon in the colour indicates whether or not it will draw on or underneath the roads. So in our scenario, I just need to make sure I'm picking the one without the little icon, and then we can just draw it on the road itself without any issues. Same idea as the little car park build. You can adjust the brightness of these colours by adding a semi-transparent white or black directly on the colour surfaces. I'm going to repeat the process for all 6 stops and try and get it matching as closely to the trams as I can. The fenced net lane that I had chosen in this development is actually quite reflective. You don't really notice it unless you're close up, but when it's up against these bright surfaces, the reflection is pretty obvious. So along those lines, I've just deleted them and I've replaced them with a solid brick wall instead. As I'm building these coloured lane elements up, I do want them to look relatively symmetrical in terms of positioning. It did take a bit of time just adjusting them and giving them the look that they all have the same length, you know, along each of the lines. To give them a little bit of worn look, I'm going to use Broman's dirt surfaces as usual. Always a nice addition when we are trying to dirty things up a little bit. To give an extra element of customization, I'm going to go along the tram stops and recolour some of the assets on the pergolas, and I'm going to match them up to the colour of the lines as well. The pink line is looking far too vibrant, so we're going to come back and see what we can do about that one. I ended up just using a different colour palette, added the dark surface again, and it looked a little bit more natural, I guess. Over at the central station, I went back and I added some transport signs to the buildings that overlook the tracks. I forgot to do that in the last episode, so now's as good a time as any to get that sorted. I created several lines of trees, again reusing some of the detail that you'll have found on the subway station and on the plaza above it, and indeed on the central station as well. I'm going to use those concrete planters again, and we'll have lines of these running along every unused tram line. After adding those trees, I reckoned everything just looked a little bit too dark on the line, so I decided to take that surface out and replace it with something a little bit lighter. I really like the look of the lighter cobblestones, and I'm going to chuck them in for now, but I think we'll add a little bit more detail to the tram shelters. I'll need some seating in here, and sports benches always work pretty well. Get them recoloured so we can have some uniformity, throughout the shelters. I think for these larger scale developments, a bit of advertising always looks the part and adds an extra level of colour and interest to each individual station. In this particular scenario, it also adds the impression that we've got a bit more of a solid wall on these roads of pergolas as well. So just a case of snapping them on and then just shifting them into place with that transform tool. I revisited these surfaces again between the tracks one last time, and to avoid a light surface against a light road sort of blending into each other, I went and created a partial outline or a bit of a border to the surface, and that should help make the area stand out a little bit with a bit of luck. The first props I added here were for the benches and the trash bins, and then I switched over to nighttime view and added a bit more illumination specifically to the tram stops themselves. The big commercial lights do a pretty nice job of creating a safe and secure area for those Sims to use the nighttime facilities. I still wanted to add a little bit more character to these tram stops, so I've added some more facilities for buying tickets. I'm going to use two different types of machines. One is just simply a parking ticket machine, and the other larger ones, I'm going to imagine that they can be used for purchasing different types of tickets, perhaps subway, bus or trams or trains, all at the same place. So I'm going to combine a couple of props together. I'm going to use the ATM machines, and then I'm going to grab one of the big transport props and then pull that down over the top of the ATM machine, and it kind of looks like a big old office ticket machine, doesn't it? The finishing touches for these areas is just to add a little bit of basic walls around some of the detailed platform areas, and we should be able to crack on and move on with the next part of the build. Just like in the previous episodes, as we've been building up this transit hub, I am going to just spam and throw in some surrounding buildings to give us a quick backdrop, and we can really get a feel for how the area is going to look once we properly start on this downtown. So I reckon we've managed to integrate it quite well into the wider development down here. The plan from the start of the subway build was to have tram lines, running horizontally each side of the subway, so it's nice to see that kind of finally coming together. Expanding the park networks throughout and towards the central station with the same park asset, and where space is too tight, just making a mini version of it, I think really helped give that joined up look, to the whole place. There's plenty of strong lines on the individual tram lines drawing your eye towards the park and the existing infrastructure, and I really like the splash of colour the tram stops give to the build. The additional surface work I think helps really tone down the colours and gives a more natural weathered look on those stops. There's a reasonable bit of walking action on the go already, but once we start developing the downtown, this whole place will be buzzing with movement and life, and I'm really looking forward to getting to that. Remember, this area is still a work in progress. A lot of the buildings are just hastily plopped down. They will be replaced with some more thoughtful development in later episodes. The next episode will focus on road connectivity. As things stand, the road network into our downtown is purely functional. It's just to keep things ticking over, and it really only exists to provide services. realistically to the buildings down here. I'm planning on connecting the highway network, and I've got a number of interchanges in mind to add to the area. We'll need to connect the arterial network as well, so I think there's some scope for some bridges and for some tunnels. And I've got a pretty good idea of what I want to achieve down here. I just need to figure out some of the trickier parts. Once I get all of that done, I will be working on making the game save available for you guys. And we might have a community event or two based around the release of the map on the Discord as well, depending if there's the interest for it. So if you want to have a play about with the build on your own PC, just make sure you're on the Discord, and I will ping everybody when it's available. Patreon and YouTube members will get it first, and then it will be available for everybody completely free shortly afterwards. Of course, just watching the videos and maybe dropping a like or a comment is plenty of support for me, and I'm very grateful for it. But if anybody does want to go a little bit further and support the channel financially, you can do. Patreon links are on the homepage. So that's it from me, guys. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.